The sons of God and the daughters of men. In Genesis 6:2 we read, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Many today believe that the sons of God in Genesis 6:2 are angelic beings from heaven. They use a few verses, wrongly understood, to support this belief. We will later examine these texts and also break down Genesis 6 in order to understand just who the sons of God are in this case. Many will say that the sons of God in the Old Testament are always angels, but the scriptures testify against them. In Exodus 4 verse 22 we read, "And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son." If Israel is God's son, then that makes Israel a son of God. This is one clear example from the Old Testament that God's people can be called the sons of God. By taking the following verses in the Old Testament that speak about the sons of God, we should be able to see what qualifies a being to be a son of God. We find these in Deuteronomy 14:1, Hosea 2:1, Isaiah 43:6, and Deuteronomy 32:5-6. Job 1 verse 6 tells us, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." In Job chapter 2 verse 1, "Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord." And again in Job 38 verse 7, "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Clearly these beings have all made a decision to place themselves under God's divine authority. Here are statements from the New Testament that tell us what qualifies a being to become a son of God. John chapter 1 verse 12 says, "But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name." Romans chapter 8 verse 14 says, "For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God." In 1 John chapter 3 verse 1, "Behold what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God." We are clearly shown here that to be a son of God requires a being to be chosen to have chosen to follow him, be led by his Spirit, and be loved by him. These three things must all be in place together at all times. This has applied to both men and heavenly beings. The belief that sons of God in the Old Testament are only ever angels clearly holds no weight whatsoever. One person writes, "Why didn't Moses say angels if he meant angels? There are 15 references to angels in the Pentateuch, and each time it refers to angels, it calls them angels, never the sons of God. The only exception is in Genesis chapter 3 verse 24, when he calls them cherubim. Therefore calling them angels here is anything but obvious. To the contrary, the angel view would seem more inconsistent in this context of Genesis, where angels are never specifically mentioned. Now let's examine some more texts that they use to say that the sons of God that came in unto the daughters of men are angels. Job chapter 1 verse 6 says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day." It is said that the sons of God that came in unto the daughters of men are the angels that kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. Here are some serious problems with this view. There is no record that angels ever reproduce. The Bible specifically states that angels do not marry, in Matthew 22 verse 30. Now clearly if they do not marry, that is because God had created them without a need to. God is not a God that creates pointless things, so we can be absolutely certain that angels do not have reproductive organs. Such organs were given to man with the sole intent of populating the whole earth. If angels simply left their first estate, their own habitation, their home, this would not have given them a change of anatomy. Some speculate that because angels can appear as men, they must have somehow chosen to make reproductive organs to appear in order to mate with the daughters of men. This is so absurd, the best they can do is speculate how it happened because there is no Bible text explaining it. The key to refute this idea is in the word appear. To appear as something does not make you into that thing. However, angels make us see them as men. They are not men in the slightest. Another verse used for this is 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. This verse is used to say that the marrying and mating with the daughters of men is a sin of the angels. But let's just look at this a little more closely. Notice that both Jude chapter 1 and 6 and 2 Peter 2 4 end speaking about the exact same thing. The angels are reserved in chains in darkness unto judgment. In Jude chapter 1 it was because they left their first estate, their own habitation. In 2 Peter 2 4 it was because they sinned. One verse explained the other. 2 Peter 2 4 shows us that it was the act of not keeping their first estate and leaving their own habitation that was their sin. At the root of this was their decision to follow Lucifer in his rebellion against God. This caused the war in heaven in Revelation chapter 12 verse 7. To further prove that this is where their sin was, Revelation 12 goes on to tell us that the angels were cast out of heaven with Satan, Revelation 12:9, which perfectly fits with what it says in Jude chapter 1, verse 6. Notice that so far in this biblical explanation of these verses, there is not a single reference to angels marrying with women. The Bible itself has explained away the verses they use to support their theory. Now let us look into why God differentiates the two groups, sons of God and daughters of men, as such. There are only two mentions of the daughters of men in the whole Bible, and both are in Genesis 6, speaking about the same group of people. To help us understand who exactly they are, we will also look into who the sons of God, the sons of men are. Clearly the sons and daughters of men are of the same class, albeit a different gender. The sons of men are mentioned a total of 23 times in the scriptures. In every case it is speaking of the wicked men of the earth, men who are without God. By this we can then conclude that the daughters of men are women of the earth, who are wicked, women without God. Now in context of Genesis 6 we can see why God describes the two groups in such a way. On one hand we have the wicked daughters of men, just like sons of men. On the other hand, we have the sons of God. With the understanding we now have, we can conclude that these sons were not wicked, but righteous, followers of God, led by His Spirit and abiding in His love. God has always told His people not to marry the wicked. They were to remain separate, a peculiar people. God's people, even before the flood, would have had this understanding and kept themselves away from the wicked. This does not mean that they cut themselves off, because Enoch prophesied in his day, and so did Noah. They undoubtedly preached to the wicked just as God's people must today. Clearly the line was drawn at living with and sharing close relationships with the wicked. Today we have an example of wicked women. They wear very little clothing and they make themselves up in order to show off their beauty. This would have been of the same in the days of before the flood, and so the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Genesis chapter 6 verse 2. As a result of this, the righteous line soon began to fade away, and before long there was only Noah left, and God had no choice but to cleanse the earth by flood. Further in the belief of angels marrying with women is the belief that they had offspring that were not entirely human. They conclude that from the following verse, Genesis chapter 6 verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. They say that these giants were the children of fallen angels, mating with the daughters of men that became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. But that's not what the verse is saying. We must take the chapter in context. From Genesis chapter 6 verse 1 to 4. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, before the flood, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same children, not the giants, became mighty men, which were of old men of renown. It is not saying that the giants were the result of the sons of God coming in unto the daughters of men. It is saying that the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men at the same time that there were giants on the earth before the flood. Those children, growing up in a wicked society, became mighty men, like Nimrod, the mighty one, the mighty hunter. They exalted themselves and became famous, men of renown. So if the two groups are distinctly different, who are the giants? There were giants in the earth in those days, before the flood. This was said by Moses, some thousands of years later. Archaeology has shown that many animals that exist today were much larger in the past. Since creation and after sin, all creatures have experienced degeneration of their genetic makeup. If this resulted in animals getting smaller over time, it would certainly apply to humans as well. Moses existed sometime after the flood. In his time, it was clearly not common for giants to still be in existence. Moses was simply stating that mankind were giants in those days and also after the flood. Noah was a giant, his children would have been giants, and from then on, men would have gotten smaller and smaller. Occasionally, however, some may have retained the genetic information or had some deformity in order to possess a giant stature. Examples of this are found in the time of the Israelites, in Numbers chapter 13, 31, 33, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 4. By deformity, even people today can grow into a giant stature. Each point here has been explained. It is my prayer that every individual prayerfully study this topic with a sincere heart. This false teaching does great harm to the sure word of God. This belief is also found in the book of Enoch, though in that book it is further exaggerated. It was actually from that teaching of that book that led to the Bible being misinterpreted. This is called private interpretation.